One of the reasons we had you all introduce yourselves and what your projects are is when it comes to grant writing, especially with government grant writing, they really look at collaboration, partnerships, and bigger bangs for their buck. This group, just from the discussion I heard, there are probably 10 or 15 different partnerships or multiple partnerships that could occur for writing a large federal grant that would benefit each of your separate groups, agencies, farms, anything you're working toward. And before you leave here today, I would hope that the networking would go way beyond what just happened here. To succeed in today's grant writing market and government contracts, you cannot apply solely as a single entity. It is very difficult to get funded without partnerships, and you do have to consider that when you're looking at various grants. Having said that, I think Carolyn has some basics we were going to get into.
Just sort of nuts and bolts. How many here have ever written a grant? Has anybody here written? So you've done some grant writing. Okay, that's great. So for those of you that haven't, there can be some misconceptions about grants in that they're easy and that you just write it and the money comes in. And unfortunately, that's not true. Grants are very competitive and have gotten more and more so competitive. Something like 80% of the grants that are submitted don't match the funders' guidelines and are tossed out without even being reviewed, really. So just keep in mind that it can also be a very long process. I've seen it take a year or more between applying and then actually receiving the funds. The other thing to keep in mind, too, is that for your purposes, we're mostly going to be focusing on USDA. There are some nonprofits in the room, and so you're going to have a broader scope of funders that you can draw from. But for the independent producers, it's primarily going to be USDA. USDA does have some grant programs available, but they also have a lot of loan programs available. Even some of their grant programs are reimbursable, so you also want to keep an eye on that. You know, we put together a little list of what to think about before you apply for a grant opportunity. And the more effort you have to put into it, the more you're going to want to really think about, do I want to do this? A federal grant can take it's really a lot of work to apply for it, and then it's even more work once you get it. So once you get the grant, that doesn't mean that you can just skip off into the sunset with your pot of gold. Obviously, you don't know that.
And I'd like
but you do. There are contract obligations, so please do make sure that you're going to be able to fulfill your contract obligations, because the feds will ask for their money back if you can't fulfill your contract. They do that a lot.
But now I'm going to throw in the catch-22 to that contract and the money. One of the difficult things about a federal contract is currently the feds are working on whatever the next round of grants are going to be. Generally, it's called the NOFA or the NEFA. That's generally released sometime in June or July, and that's a listing of all available grants within the federal government. When that comes out, the first RFP, request for funds or request for proposal, generally is released in October, and you apply in January, February-ish. You don't see the funds till the following June or July. So you're looking at up to a year or more before those funds come to you. As part of that proposal, you have to write a budget. We all know that the cost of goods as well as services do what over that year's period? They go up. Tony Bruno rule of thumb, and you won't find it anywhere else. I tend to always ask for a 30% contingency fund and ask for an additional 30%. In other words, if you need 100,000, you're going to ask for 130,000. That way you can meet that demand a year down the road. If they award that, and that's the other key, the pot of gold isn't just given to you, it's usually cost reimbursement. You have to spend some money to get some money. It's just not, here's a check. And so you have to plan on that as you move forward. The budgeting piece of a grant is kind of the crux of the whole thing. And sometimes you won't even know you get to move forward until the very last minute. And then you're going to be asked to put 5,000 out, 10,000 out, 20,000 out, and be reimbursed for it. I would tell you that sometimes that's difficult, especially if you're small mom and pop just starting out on a quarter acre, half acre, 5 acre parcel. So what you need to be prepared to do is whoever you're purchasing product from, some of the other folks, to understand that you may need 30 to 60 days to pay them, so that by the time you work through the system, you actually are not fronting any more of your money. You're rotating invoices. And so that's kind of key to what you're doing on the operational side.
And this is already after you already received the grant?
Well, this is generally what you'll receive is an award letter. But again, just back to the basic budget, there is a line for contingency in that budget. Use it. Put that 30% in there, and that's what it was last year. That's what it'll be this year. Next year, who knows? But I would stick with that 30% so that you're able to afford to do what you want to do if you are awarded.
The other thing to keep in mind is there's often a match requirement for a lot of the grants. A lot of the USDA grants have a match requirement. It'll say that in the grant award. I brought one that came out recently from NRCS. It's federal speak at its very best, you guys, so you just have to weed through it, read through the gobbledygook, as it were. But all the information that you need will be in here. I will typically read an RFP, no exaggeration, at least 10 times because they're so dense. And you first couple read-throughs, you'll think, oh yeah, this is good. This is a match. It's going to be great. And then you start to look at it a little more closely and say, oh wait, there's that 25% cash match. That's going to be tough for us, or whatever it might be. Sometimes it's in kind. That's definitely one of the first things that you're going to want to look at. The other thing too, this one, for instance, I was looking at for my client, it actually says, it's an NRCS grant, it actually mentions small farmers. And so you think, great, okay, it's for small and beginning farmers. But then when you look at who was actually funded from this grant, there wasn't a single small farmer in there. It was all universities and large groups of multi-state consortiums and things like that. So you want to look at it pretty closely before you're going to make the leap and spend all the time and effort to apply, especially for a large, like I said, a large federal grant.
And I would. Well,
a federal grant, you know, they're going to be. It depends on. They really vary tremendously. $100,000, $100,000, you know, million. Sometimes they'll have. The other thing you want to look at is the maximum award. Don't ever ask for more than the maximum. Well, I'll just ask for what I need. Some people have that thought process, which is valid, but they'll throw it out if you ask for more than the maximum.
I would tell you that one of the other things from where I sat in the grant writing world was one-on-one facial recognition with the government employees. Make sure the local people know who you are. Make sure they've seen your operation. Make sure they know you by name and by face. Don't become too much of a pain in the ass, but invite them out before you apply if you have time and they have time. Make sure they walk through the place. Make sure they see that you're moving forward, because at that point you may get help with the grant, or you may get somebody who thinks it's worthwhile, who will look into some of the gray areas so that you may succeed where otherwise you wouldn't have. It's very important to do that. I would also say that it's very important to get some of your congressmen involved, if you know one personally. Call and ask their aide to follow the grant through the process. Nothing moves a grant forward like Raul Grijalva's aide calling up USDA and say, hey, we were wondering about this grant. all of a sudden the reviewers on that grant know a congressman has an interest in that. It moves you ahead. There are a lot of little tricks.
Even locally too, the Board of
And
Supervisors.
yeah, Board of Supervisors is good for support. Some of the state legislators are very good. If you know them or you have the ability to talk to them when writing a grant, make them aware. Make them aware of what you're doing and what it'll do to you and your community or the community at large, so that you have some federal or some government support with what you're writing.
And I would say USDA is much more approachable than most of the other federal agencies. They really do try to help you out. I know probably several of you have already applied for EQUIP grants. Have you guys applied for EQUIP grants? And from my understanding is that were they pretty helpful for the process to get through? Yeah. So if you haven't looked into it, I would definitely investigate the EQUIP program. I just spoke to Kristen about it the other day, and I think they're pretty much out of money for this year, but you can apply anytime. It's EQIP, and again, it's reimbursable, but they'll pay for quite a wide range of irrigation, and there's a whole list of things that they can help
do an awful lot.
That's probably the most basic one I would look for.
If you're rural, USDA Community Development will do a lot. I would tell you that depending which area of the state you're in, we're split kind of funny, and that we're split vertically rather than horizontally. And Deborah Stewart, who is on that list, actually covers Tucson and Santa Cruz County, even though her office is in Phoenix. And anybody over in Cochise County in that area, Jeff Hooper is the guy to go to, and his office is in Wilcox. Most of their funding through rural development is going to be under their community facilities grant. When we worked at the food bank, we were fortunate. We got a walk-in cooler for the Marana farm. It was kind of tricky getting that particular unit out there. USDA has a stipulation that if your community is larger than 20,000, you don't qualify for their funding. That's their definition of rural, a community that's under 20,000. I will tell you that each of the various areas of USDA has a different definition for rural. So when you're reviewing the grant applications, look very closely at what their definition is. But I tell you, with Marana, we were able to draw some new lines for the community of Arivaca, or for Marana. And what we did was we moved the line to the west and went from the freeway west rather than picking up Marana on the east side of the freeway. That way we eliminated a huge part of the population. You can do that technically when you talk with your representative. And I won't say it's gerrymandering, but you can move the lines slightly and make it work. Again, another little gray area and trick. I know Carolyn's more dotting I's and crossing T's. But there are ways to make it work for all communities, including some of the parts of Tucson.
Yeah.
I also heard a lot of you talk about employees. Employees are very difficult to get covered under USDA. Currently, Pima County has a micro enterprise grant through Pima College. And I would suggest you go talk to those folks over off of Bonita. It's Congress in Bonita.
Go to the micro business.
Yeah, go to the micro business.
The website's on the list too. The Micro Business Advancement Center.
Yeah, Micro Business Advancement Center, and they will do some startup enterprises, cover some employees. They have some funding for internships as well, so that may be helpful.
And they can help with business plans and SBA type information. They're a good resource.
Correct.
If you need a little bit, they're a great place to go.
Yeah, they're a great resource.
And their grant just got renewed for another 3 years, so right now their money is fresh. I want to say that it was something like 800,000 a year for each year, but I'm not 100% sure. I know it's a lot of money to go around right now. We can talk a little FMPP, Farmer Market Promotion Program. Last year, the Farmer Market Promotion Program changed midstream, and they were willing to not only fund farmer markets, but to fund composting projects, to fund studies, community studies similar to the food shed study or food system study. They were doing a lot of broader outreach, with the bottom line being to have funding available for more farmers to sell in farmers markets. That is their ultimate goal. One of the unique things about the FMPP grant is every year those grants are reviewed by your peers. Even if you apply, you can be a peer reviewer. You go onto their website and say you want to be a peer review. You have 3 or 4 days online training. Then if you're selected to do a peer review, you're giving 30 grants from states other than your state to review, grade, and send back in. And you get to see what others have written. That's really beneficial if you get yours turned down and have to write one again. You're trained on the point spread and how those points are broken up. And it's a very effective way to learn on the move.
Is this the Carmen Humphreys grant?
Yes, it is.
And that grant, it seems like they add, it's a really small when you compare it to the other USGA one, but they are adding to it every year. It's one that they're paying a little more attention to.
I think this year they'll have 15 million to distribute. It sounds like a lot, but that's going to be distributed across all 50 states. So you have to take that into consideration. You can ask for multiple years funding from them though, up to 2 years. So the other thing is if your program, if you can spread out the costs over 2 years and ask for a smaller amount, that's a more effective way to be funded rather than asking for all the money up front.
That one's coming out pretty soon, isn't it?
It'll be out October.
No, I thought it was in the spring.
No, it's already out for this year.
Okay. As far as, I wasn't going to get into too much about the nuts and bolts of grant writing. I'm sure you guys don't want to spend your full time writing grants. I really doubt that. But a few things to keep in mind is you must answer every question. If they ask a question, even if you say it doesn't apply to me, or you still have to answer the question. USDA, like I said, is really nice in that they're very, very user friendly. They're one that won't necessarily throw it out. They'll say, oh, we need to know about this, or we need to know about that, or they'll work with you much more so than any other agency I've dealt with. I have a sort of really brief tip sheet that probably has more information than anybody ever wants about grant writing do's and don'ts. But you do want to think carefully about what it is that you want to accomplish. It's really tempting to chase the money when you're going after a grant. We've all done it. And to try to make your request fit into what the grant is. And to a certain extent, you have to do that. But before, really think about what your objective is, what you're trying to accomplish with the grant. I like to even bring it down to one sentence. Here's what we're going to do. And that helps you really coalesce it. If you can't explain what you're trying to do in a very short, succinct way, then you need to think a little bit more about get your thoughts in a line a little bit better maybe, and so that you can have it a little bit more cohesive. As Tony said, pay close attention to the budget. Make sure you have all the elements that you need in there, but have it be realistic as well. People, you want to have it. I'm sorry. getting over a cold, so my brain's not working very well. Make it, everybody says the same thing, but it's so true. You really want to make it realistic. You want to make it doable. You want to say, the best way to do it is to say, here's the problem, here's the need, here's why it's an issue, here's how what we're doing can solve that issue, and here's what we need. And if you can make it seamless like that, here's the need, here's the problem, here's what we're going to do, and here's how the funding is going to help with that. If you can do that, if you can frame it in such a way, it makes it very attractive to the funders, because then it's easy for them to see how they are going to be able to make a difference with this project, how they can help. And that's very attractive to them, of course.
Well, and I think in painting that picture, you do have to consider the government wants to see hard numbers. They want to see that their bang for their buck went to helping people. The difficulty that the rural area has is small numbers. That's always going to happen that way, versus somebody in Tucson who can all of a sudden get people, banging down the door to come in and purchase product from them or use their farm product. And so in that picture, you have to be innovative, show why it's so important to your region. I would tell you, put your heart and soul into it and paint a beautiful picture for them so that somebody who is one of your peers reading that gets exactly what you're saying. Yes, that's where I'm at, that's what we're trying to do. We're going to fund this project.
And be specific. Always use numbers. When I'm reviewing a grant, typically what I'll do when I'm editing it is I'll add in numbers. How many, how long, when. So don't just say, oh, we're gonna increase it. By how much? And how long is it going to take you to do that? The more specific you can be, the better. So always, every time you're looking through it, think, oh, can I add a number here? Can I quantify this? And if so, how?
And then I guess the other catch to all of that is, even after you're awarded funding, the government wants you to be transparent with that money. If it's equipment, it's usually a little easier, but if it's actually some kind of deliverable, you'll be responding to the government for a year or two with quarterly reports. Money is not free. Don't ever think it is. Be sure to budget some time into that budget to do the follow-up work, to get the demographics they need, and to do those quarterly reports. Without those quarterly reports, you can be penalized. They can come back and fine you for not doing them. As a matter of fact, I know the food bank had one incident while we were there in which they were fined $10,000 for a problem with a report. So I would tell you, take things very seriously even after you've been awarded the money. Don't just think, okay, I've got the money and I'm going to go do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, we've all heard unfortunate stories about organizations that are doing great work, but are neglecting to do the reporting, and they get in trouble for that. And it makes you look like you're not doing it. It's very sad, because it's not that they're not doing what they should be doing, they're just neglected to do the reporting.
Can I add that after you receive a grant, to read the fine print as well? Because we recently received one, and there was some shattering information in there that even our local agents in the clerk's office had no idea that it was in there. And apparently it's always been there, DC says, and nobody knows how to read it. There's no definitions on it, nothing. And it changes everything, to the point where we might not even want the grant.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd add to that too, one of the,
right
even between us, when you apply for a grant to the government, you're actually not applying for a grant. You are applying for a contract, a government contract. You've told the government that this is what I'm going to do. If they like it, they send you the contract and they say, this is what we heard you said you were going to do. In some cases, you can go back and say, wait a minute, that's not what I said, and we'd like to make some changes. Usually those changes are made to the scope of work that's in as a part of that contract. So when they send you those 300 pages in the contract, be sure to read each portion, because you may be surprised at what you're signing for, and that's very true.
That's a very good point.
How detailed are these quarterly reports? Income, expense?
It depends what you put in the
Wait,
grant.
we're supposed to repeat the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. John asked, how extensive are the reports and how much time? And I'd say overall, it depends what you say within the grant that you're going to accomplish. And somewhere within that scope of work that you're submitting, you might say that your community's demographic is 6% of the population is below the poverty level, and you're going to try to reach that 6%. Then you'll be online somewhere with the federal government or doing a hard copy, and you'll say that you've reached 3%, and you know you've reached 3% because of X, Y, and Z. And they're looking for those kind of responses. There will be some demographics. Again, if you are doing an equipment type grant, it's, okay, I bought the unit. We're using the unit. This is what we're doing with it.
It depends on who you get it from, as far as what the reporting's going to be.
Limits on those grants? Back to receive one?
Pardon me?
Time limits where you have to use that. In other words, if you apply for one and you're wanting to build something and all that, but you don't want to start going through the codes and all that for the city and that until you...
I'm sorry, I laugh because your question is actually kind of a multiple level question. And I will tell you that the first part is, are there time limits? There's always time limits. There's no two ways about that. But when you get into codes and different things like that, I was involved in a particular grant for food banks across the state of Arizona. The funding came in. We purchased refrigerated units to be sent to various parts of the state. They all came in, they were all built to a certain spec, and what we found out was that even though the money was federal money and we went to Bisbee, Arizona to put one in, their town codes didn't match federal codes, and we had to, at our cost, adjust those units for Bisbee. We took one to Sells, Arizona, and guess what? The nation has their own code. We had to rebuild those units. Again, no grant is free. It took us 4 years or 5 years after we received the units to get them all to code, to spec, and running, and there were only 15 of the units in the state. So I will tell you that, again, when you're doing your budget piece, you better be checking your codes and your permitting, because you want the federal government to pick up those costs. You don't want to find out after the fact that this is, you know, an expense you've got to pocket out.
I wanted to add one resource on here for especially for the nonprofits in the room. The Foundation Center, many of you may have heard of it. The Foundation Center is a good clearinghouse for funding sources. You can go to the local library and they have access to their database there. You can get access any computer to some of their services, but if you want access to full service Foundation Center, you can just go to the library. They also have AZ grants at the library. And the library staff are extremely helpful too. If you just want to go and ask them information, they have tremendous resources for all sorts of businesses and nonprofit. I really recommend just checking out the library. So now, do you want to just open it up to some questions?
Yeah, I had a question.
Nick has a question.
You were saying, Carolyn, that you recommend being very specific in terms of numbers, increased by such and such.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm imagining, maybe this isn't true, but I'm imagining for a lot of folks that we have no idea what realistic numbers really are. And so, what do you recommend? And if we really don't know, what are you doing?
You do. We have a running joke between Tony and I. That's why we're laughing. This is you do your best educated guess, and aim. That's the trickiness of it, because you want to have it so that it looks good, but you definitely don't want to inflate the numbers. It's much better to, when you do your reporting, to say gosh, we not only met our goals, we exceeded them, than to say, oh, well, we're short by 30, you know. So always undershoot it a little if you're not sure. So whatever your goals are, make sure they're realistic, that you're really going to be able to achieve them. You're just going to have to kind of, you just do your best guess.
I have to say that one of the reasons we laughed is it is better to undershoot and make yourself look good, and that is the bottom line. In the industry, so to speak, we call it a WAG, and that's a wild ass guess, because the reality is on some of the demographics you're not going to find the resources. Arizona doesn't keep the resources. If you include any of the native lands, there are actually some regulations that they don't give that information out, and so you are doing nothing more than a guess.
If it's a new project, you're not going to know. You're all in your new territory.
But I will also tell you that you all have this new Food Policy Council that's being started, and call them and ask them to do the research for you. Get them to provide the numbers you need. Then you can say you received them from, and you actually can certify some of your numbers.
That's true too.
In the beginning, when you said they particularly like to give the grants to people with cooperatives and partnerships, can you give us a few examples of that? And in that case, who would actually write the grant?
Well, that's always a concern
Repeat the
when you're
question.
writing the.
So the question is that, explain partnerships and how does that work, and who would write the grant?
Right. And I think there's always a concern as to who writes the grant. Hopefully you're all like-minded enough that you can come to some agreement in the discussion, but sometimes the partnership is as much as you going to another organization and say, will you write a letter of support? Okay, it could be as simple as that. But then there's the other hard partnerships you may have. You're farming, but you get manure from John, somebody or other stable. You have a partnership there.
Okay.
You know, get some fencing work done from the guy down the road who likes what you're doing and volunteers his time. Also, your volunteer time can be utilized as a partnership, as well as an in-kind cash donation. And I think I would add at this point too, just thinking on the run, your volunteers, any of them that you have, are your biggest in-kind contribution. I think currently the federal government uses a $26 an hour figure for your volunteers. And that racks up quickly. And if you're working with USDA rural development, they usually want a 50% cash or in-kind match. And if you need to match, you use your volunteer hours. The key to that is if you do multiple grants, you can only use those hours once. So track which volunteers are being, and their hours are being applied to which grant. And that's where it could get confusing if you're managing more than one grant. And you'll have to be ready for those cases if you choose to apply for more than one.
I want to add too, though, that the more dynamic the partnership, the better. They are looking more at, I mean, sometimes they don't even want a letter of support because they can be just face value. So they're really looking for people that have a genuine partnership and that you're working together. For instance, the gentleman that talked about starting a farmer's market, maybe he would partner with some other local farmers there and they could write the FMPP grant together. Or maybe with a, I don't know, who might be a partner,
Well,
local business. Maybe several farms want to get together and start a cooperative and write a grant together.
I think the Marana farm is probably one of the best case scenarios for partnerships, in that the property is owned actually by the state of Arizona still. It's leased to the city of Marana, who subleases it to Community Food Bank. And that's how the Community Food Bank is out there growing. The town of Marana can't apply for grant funding because they're not a 501c3 and they're not an entity that can apply for the funding needed to operate the farm. Therefore, the Community Food Bank happens to be a nonprofit, so they can bring the money in to get done what the town of Marana wants done on the farm. Then you talk about the volunteers coming in, you talk about the schools coming in, you talk about the produce going to the farmer's market at the medical center. So the medical center is now involved as a partner, and that food is going directly to the patients of the medical center. And so that whole food web ends up being a part of the grant that went into the Marana farm. And you are trying to, connect the dots between everybody who's helping you out. If you receive money from private entities, you don't want to give individual names, but if there's a business name or something you can put on there, that certainly is a way to move forward on partnerships as well.
And the more diverse things that you do, the more opportunities for funding you're going to have. If you offer educational opportunities, for instance, that's going to open up a lot more opportunities for funding.
And it also shows how the community is involved when you start doing something like that. The feds want to be able to tout your program, and they want to say that, look at what we've done. We've provided this money, and it's done all of this in the town of Marana. And so I will tell you that annually they do a write-up on every grant that's out there. It goes into a little book. It probably collects some dust somewhere in DC, but somebody at some point in time looks at it and knows that that money was well spent, and hopefully it's not on CNN sometime later for something that's not gone well. Any other questions?
We're just applying for the first time. I'm with Native Seed Search and for an OREI grant to do research in agriculture, and the EI is an education initiative. So we're not only doing basic research in agriculture, but we have to have an educational component, and we are going to partner with several other national organizations to do it. And so my question: do you have any experience? We're definitely having partners, but we're having a discussion as to whether one institution should take the lead and write the grant and be the executor of it, or do we do sub-awards and have each, do you know of any advantage in making it more complicated and having each institution have its own budget and as a part of it? It seems like it's easier to write if it's just one institution.
I would ask, do you all play nice together?
Yeah, we do so far.
Yeah, wait till there's money involved.
Yeah.
Well,
Do you guys have,
gosh,
do you have any memorandum of understanding in place with the other agencies?
Well, that's being fleshed now, and
Yeah.
of course, you're coming up to a deadline.
Right.
We have, we're real similar in our goals, and the gentlemen that are involved, we've known for quite a while and support what we're doing. So, there is an understanding there, and I'm pretty good at making sure the language, the contract, in a sense, is clear enough. We wouldn't get into it if we didn't think about that. But what we're facing is that, it's online form now. And when you go in, and it's hugely more complicated if each person has their own budget and in a sense, they're listed as sub-awardees. So I was wondering if you had any experience with, is it easier or better for one big grant proposal, and then we'll take responsibility of re-granting in a sense that the money out to the other institutions that would give us more control, or do we have a better chance of getting the grant if we show them as equals with their own budgets?
Okay, so the question is, are you all going to apply separately, or are you going to apply together?
Together.
I would say apply together, for sure, especially if you've got a good working relationship already. But like Tony mentioned, make sure you've got your MOUs in place. Thinking of the CPPW
I am too.
grant, right? Yeah, and
I would tell you that even
if
then
you're
it's
okay
a
with-
moving target.
yeah, it will be.
Okay,
It
Yeah.
will be.
I'm just trying to get a sense from you. We are going to apply together, but they have a system set up where we can all do our budget separately and still apply
Is
for
it?
one grant. And that's where it got complicated
Oh.
for me. I'm going, I don't know, I've never seen that before, and I didn't know if you had any experience. So.
Yeah, I think that could go.
I think
Good
there would be a
either
cleaner way to do
way.
it,
Yeah,
to be
that does
truthful.
sound
I'm not sure what it
complicated.
is, not knowing all the particulars to be
Yeah.
truthful, but
Well, I'm
Yeah.
looking for clean things.
Yeah, I like simple
So last
too. Right.
question.
Okay.
Could I just share, we did a grant, it was for branches that work together. And we were fortunate to have kind of a non-interested third party that was through the NRCD. So each entity had a separate budget. The grant amount, this was through Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, and each individual entity received money, and then the project received money in addition to that to do some monitoring and to fund other partners that would come in with little pieces of it. But it was pretty clean, mainly because the person that functioned, or the entity that functioned as an administrator, didn't actually receive any funds, but just acted on behalf of the entity, so that might be helpful.
Okay.
And just to let you know before you leave, both Carolyn and my cards are on the back table. If you're so interested, you can just pick them up.
Yeah, I would, just in terms of logistics, we're gonna go to lunch here in a second, but I would say, like Carolyn was saying, or maybe both of you, think about who else in the room you heard saying, oh, this is what we're trying to do, and maybe over lunch, find them. And this is just the beginning of talking about partnerships, and both of these folks can help out, and I would definitely recommend getting their cards. And so we're gonna do lunch from now until 1 o'clock, and the dining room is straight up this sidewalk through the grass. It's sort of diagonal. You'll hit the building and turn right into that building. And after that, we'll come back to the main room at 1 o'clock.
Great. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.